Oh, wow. This is from just a few minutes ago. All right, so this is an article here on PC Gamer. Joe Blackburn on Destiny 2 conspiracy theories. What happened to the PvP team? And the witness being able to 1v1 anyone in the universe. We spoke to the game director about everything revealed in the Final Shape showcase and plenty more. It's been 2 weeks since the mood music in Destiny 2 got so bad that game director Joe Blackburn took to his personal Twitter to deliver a video message addressing various community complaints and concerns. And for a studio that tends to deal in lengthy blog posts, such a personal approach only underlined the perceived urgency of the situation. Ironically, the latest meltdown had been triggered by one such state of the game post, which, rather than allaying concerns, had airdropped patrol onto them. Yes, it did. It was like right before DCX. Now, it should be noted that Destiny 2's audience is febrile at best of times, as is perhaps inevitable with an almost 10-year-old live service game. But things have escalated this year. In a recent video, the veteran Destiny 2 content creator Dado described the reaction to the post as an absolute frenzy, and the worst I have ever seen the community, surpassing even Curse of Osiris in Season 2. Yeah, I would agree with that. The worst we have ever seen since Curse of Osiris Season 2. For different reasons, though. I will say Curse of Osiris, there was so much riding on that expansion because everyone was like, okay, double primary sucks, Bungie. We hate it. Revert it. And everybody's like, they're probably going to revert it in Curse of Osiris. And Bungie was like, nah, man. Double primary, we go. Now, the Destiny community's laundry list of issues include burnout with the seasonal model, aggressive monetization, the lack of attention paid to PvP, and the complete abandonment of the Gambit mode. Hell, you know it's time to worry when the lore guys are lighting pitchforks. None of this was helped by the fact that this year's big expansion, Lightfall, was substantially weaker than its predecessor, The Witch Queen, particularly in terms of its confusing narrative. Although Blackburn's video didn't address every complaint, microtransactions were conspicuously absent. It did serve as effective damage control, resetting the community's anger meter ahead of last week's showcase for the Final Shape expansion. I will say, yes, Joe Blackburn coming out and talking to us personally, it chilled me out. You know what I mean? It made me feel like he's got a personal stake in this. Now, Joe Blackburn cut his teeth on the raid team at Bungie, where his work included the acclaimed Last Wish from 2018's Forsaken. He then served as creative lead of the season of Opulence before leaving for a one-year stint as a principal designer at Riot. In 2020, Blackburn returned to Destiny 2 in the role of game director. Most seasons, Blackburn earns the Conqueror title via LFG, and after the Final Shape launches, he plans to start streaming the game. Let me just say this, Joe, you can keep doing LFG stuff, but I'm just saying we run Nightfalls. You know, we run GMs every season. You want to join us? We won't ask too many questions. You know, we'll just be gaming. We'll be hanging out. Now, during the showcase, Bungie outlined its plans for the last installment in the current saga, including a new enemy type, the surreal pale heart of the Traveler destination, and the extra super abilities for 3 of the light subclasses. It also talked about what lies beyond, with a major switch coming to the seasonal model in the wake of next year's expansions. Watching the showcase, it felt relatively conservative in terms of reveals. Speaking of Blackburn later that week, I asked him whether Bungie is now entirely focused on sticking the landing to his decade-long story, particularly given Lightfall's rocky reception. That is kind of the way to phrase it, he says. We're really trying to focus on what we do well. We've seen a bunch of other games, mostly in the single-player space, try to cap off a big chapter and how challenging it is. That challenge is also the reason why, as Blackburn explained in his video, the Final Shape is going to introduce major systemic changes like this year's Guardian rank feature. Instead, Bungie wants to double down on the core fantasies of Destiny. For Blackburn, that means weapons. When our weapons are good, Destiny is good. Okay, so the Final Shape isn't going to introduce major systemic changes. I think at this point, outside of LFG, guys, is there a major systemic change other than what people are going to normally say, things like better anti-cheat, yada, yada? Is there like a major... We've got loadouts, in-game LFG. I mean, those were like the 2 biggest ones for me. When I mean like systemic changes, I'm talking about like a quality of life, big, you know what I mean? Something that would improve the game substantially. Something that you feel like is really missing from the game. Clan housing would be amazing, but it's not like, I would love it. Look, I would love to have clan housing in the game. I would love to have, you know, something that's really pushing us to socialize more and partake in the social aspects of Destiny. But it's not detrimental to not have it. I felt like not having in-game loadouts was detrimental to Destiny. Not having LFG was detrimental to Destiny, right? I think at this point, not having better servers will be detrimental. So if there was a systemic change that should take place, it should be on that infrastructure, right? Now, over the last couple of seasons, I felt less compelled to craft god rolls of new guns, largely because my arsenal is already so stacked. Despite the tireless work of the Sandbox team when it comes to creating new perks, it feels like we're running out of design space for new stuff. Yeah, you're obviously identify one of the reasons why to do this right. It requires a shift of focus, not just on the weapons team, but in the leadership team, said Blackburn. I talked about this with exotic weapons and armor, or anything we put in the game, whether it's a new super or aspect. The law of diminishing returns means each one has to work harder to make an impact on your Guardian's loadout. We know that we have to do disruptive things to make that happen. Now, he gives the example of the Forbearance grenade launcher from the Valve the Disciple raid, which is best in slot at clearing entire waves of enemies. Blackburn says that the feeling of many players towards Forbearance is, holy shit, I'm never unequipping this thing. So he says that the studio has to do now is make something that changes how players feel about that. Yes and no. There are traits, for instance, explosive personality. I will use explosive personality with disruption break over Forbearance, right? For certain things when pairing with a kinetic, right? So, you know, there's pros and cons. Yes, Forbearance, though, is fantastic for clearing ads. Now, the risk of trying to one-up yourself is, of course, power creep. But Blackburn sees potential in creating new weapon sub-archetypes, such as the sidearm that shoots small rockets that's coming with the final shape. He also thinks that despite the fact that most players are DPS goblins who just want to make damage numbers go higher, that there's a scope for weapons that offer different kinds of utility. We have to think about it in ways that utilize utility that matters to players, says Blackburn. He points to the return of the iconic exotic weapon Gallahorn, which now buffs teammates, rockets, as a good example. Just got nerfed, but yes. Legendary weapons don't need to provide quite that level of utility to be desirable. For instance, there's a new perk this season called Heal Clip that restores health to allies and yourself when reloading after a kill. That is a way to get into support that allows players to still shoot things, but be able to provide meaningful ways to modify other players' output. So I think you'll see us exploring more of these angles. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I mean, I think all of us love the role that Lumina plays, right? Every now and then, it's nice to just kick back and play support, you know? And as long as playing support doesn't end up being detrimental to your team, you know? And that's the thing, is it comes up in certain situations, like, why use Lumina when you could just be partaking in the damage with your teammates? Now, you can also see the same philosophy at work in the new Banner of War aspect, which was added to the Strand Titan kit this season. It provides pulses of healing and a melee damage buff to allies within a nearby radius, and has already proved incredibly popular among my punchy happy pals. Again, the secret sauce seems to be damage plus utility equals good times. Now, speaking of utility, 2 of the 3 new light supers revealed in the showcase lean into team play. Void Titans will be able to throw axes that explode and can then be picked up by teammates, while Solar Warlocks can buff all their core abilities and the weapon damage of their allies. The burning elephant in the room is whether or not that will be compelling enough for Warlocks to switch off a Well of Radiance. Yeah, that's true. Which has been ubiquitous since it was added to Destiny 2 due to its mix of damage boosting and survivability. I think there's actually been PvE players asking for nerfs to Well of Radiance. I'm not saying that I agree with them. I'm just saying there have been PvE players asking for Well of Radiance to be nerfed. I asked Blackburn if he's confident that the new Solar Super can clear that bar. I'm confident right now that the new Solar Super is very good, he says. I'm not confident that without Well of Radiance changes, it doesn't just become that you need 2 Warlocks and one of them is going to run well and the other is just going to run this super. I'm going to call it right now, guys. Well of Radiance is getting a nerf. Well of Radiance is getting a nerf. That's what you need to be getting out of this. All right. When I interviewed Bungie's Kevin Yanis back in February, he described Well of Radiance as being probably in the realm of too useful, which I interpreted as hinting a nerf was inbound. Bungie swiftly denied that was the case, so I don't want to put words into anyone's mouth this time. Here's exactly what Blackburn has to say about it. We've had to do this before with things like Divinity and auto reloading. At some point, you're like, hey, the super provides utility that a lot of people like, but we are handcuffing a bunch of our players too. So what's the version of this where we could say, okay, the time for everyone feeling like they have to run this is over. We know that we have to make some changes before the final shape raid. That's surely the nerf confirmed. There you go. There you go. As for why the light subclasses got new supers when the darkness subclasses stays as strands to only have 1 each, Blackburn says the rationale is largely thematic. You are literally inside of the Traveler. The Traveler needs your help. How's the Traveler going to help you? The answer is by giving you sweet new abilities. Bungie also wants us to feel like Guardians of the Light once again. Okay, all right. Although the studio hopes the final shape will appeal as widely as possible, there's clearly a rich seam of nostalgia to draw on for veterans who first woke up in the Cosmodrome back in 2014. There's also a very good reason why we aren't getting an entirely new Darkness subclass had recently been rumored. We learned some things from Beyond Light and how Strand is integrated about how distracting that can be from the message that we're trying to tell. With that mention of Strand, the introduction of which felt shoehorned uncomfortably into Lightfall's narrative, our character literally finds it in a street. Yeah, I can resist putting one of my favorite Destiny 2 conspiracy theories to Blackburn. There's been an idea in the community for a while that Strand was actually supposed to launch as part of the Witch Queen. It makes sense because the expansion is full of references to threads, seeing into the beyond, and also features the color green predominantly. Here's Blackburn with a big bucket of cold water. You're going to get a big scoop here, he says. Strand was never designed for Witch Queen. For one thing, it just takes us longer than a year's cycle to make a whole new damage side. Even the green correlation is really funny to us because Strand didn't start out from someone writing green power on a whiteboard. Instead, he says that in the same way that Stasis thematically fits the blasted tundra of Beyond Light, so did Strand suited the neon synthwaveness of Lightfall. Strand was all Lightfall, all the time, reiterates Blackburn. And I'm sure that some people will never believe me unless they can go and see the flag fluttering on the moon. Last season's big lore bomb was that the Witness, the smoky-headed, saucer-eyed space goth who serves as Destiny 2's big bad, is in fact an entire dead civilization smushed into one supremely powerful being. The Witness that tends to enact the final shape, which as far as I can make out, involves reducing the universe to its simple state by destroying everything weaker than itself. It makes for a pleasingly esoteric antagonist, and I'm looking forward to tracking it inside the Traveler, where we'll explore a realm called the Pale Heart that reflects our experiences back at us, providing another chance for a dollop of nostalgia. As cool as all that sounds though, I can't help but feel a slight sense of disappointment that the Witness and its vast fleet of pyramid ships is largely empty, barring a smattering of new elite units. The final shape will add Strand and Stasis-wielding subjugators to the Tormentors that debuted in Lightfall. Throughout my time with Destiny, I'd always assumed the second collapse would bring an entirely new race of enemies rather than one admittedly very powerful and weird dude. Blackburn understands the concern, but points out that the Destiny's previous major threats like Gaul and Oryx have all followed the same formula of arriving in the solar system with an army. He describes the formula as, I'm going to bring a bunch of spaceships. They're all full of aliens. I am the most powerful of the aliens. What makes the Witness scarier, says Blackburn, is it's important for us that the Witness has to feel different. The way we keep phrasing it to the Raid team and the combatant team is if the Witness is 1v1s any character in the Destiny universe, the Witness wins. The Witness versus Riven, the Witness wins. The Witness versus Atheon, easy. We have to also establish raw boxing power and what the Witness does differently. As for the lack of new rank and file enemies, Blackburn argues that creating a bunch of new Dreg level units wouldn't be interesting. He compares the core combat in Destiny 2 to a skateboarding game in which the tricks you're stringing together instead of involve shooting aliens in the head. In that scenario, switching out the basic enemies doesn't make much difference to the overall experience. Instead, he points to the addition of Wyverns in Beyond Light as a better use of design efforts. We want to focus on the big bads that are going to move the needle. It's going to be Hive Guardians. It's going to be Tormentors. It's going to be Subjugators. Things that we put on the battlefield that make it feel more interesting and dynamic. I guess the only issue with that, guys, is like whenever it's like a huge new alien race, it feels like an invasion, right? At the same time, it would just be us shooting rank and file enemies, right? Bungie's already confirmed that the confrontation with the Witness will take place in the Final Shapes raid, but also promised that non-raiders will experience the climax of the story in full, including the defeat of the Witness, assuming we win, of course. Blackburn says that the denouement won't be just a cutscene. He explains that whereas the Witch Queen and the Lightfall campaigns each had 8 missions, the Final Shape will ship with 7 on day 1. The implication being that the 8th mission unlocks for everyone once the raid has been beaten. He also indicates that the format of that mission will be different to the boss encounters against Savathun and Callus from previous campaigns. When we did the Witness, it just didn't pass the sniff test, so we knew we needed a different strategy. That's really interesting. So upon beating the raid, that 8th mission will unlock. That's wild. That's actually pretty wild. You're gonna have people like literally tuning in for the raid and waiting for the raid to get beaten to then go do that mission. Time-gated ending? I mean, I'm okay with it. That's lame. It depends on how it leads. It's all about delivery. At this point, guys, it's all about delivery. So like that may sound lame, but it really just comes down to what's the setup? What's the punch, right? If they can deliver into the point where it's like, okay, I want to go raid. I want to go raid to discover this. And then after the raid, can you imagine beating day one raid for the witness and being like, yo, everyone go do this mission. We got to see what happens. Now, the eternal question with Destiny series is, okay, but what happens next? In the year following the final shape, Bungie is switching its content model from 4 seasons to 3 episodes. Each episode is structured as 3 acts and intended to tell a standalone story rather than the endless soap opera we've had for the last couple of years. But I still wonder how the new model will help with player burnout, given that it still looks very much template. What we want to be doing with episodes is creating more touch points to inject change into the game, says Blackburn. The benefit, as he sees it, is the opportunity for each episode to create longer beats around a single creative mind, ultimately resulting in stories with more depth. I think we're really looking at is being more reactive, more agile to change. Well, I mean, more so than that, it's just what is the context? You know, how are you going to, after beating the witness, what's going to intrigue us to take on the next threat? He's understandably coy when it comes to talking about whether episodic content will stay in the game for longer than the season stuff did. I don't think we're talking about that yet, says Blackburn. When I ask him whether episodes will be moved to the Destiny Content Vault at the end of the year, the answer that's not great here is that the pressure of how much stuff can fit on the disc is still immense for Destiny. For the last few years, we've been really focused on how to keep all the stuff that's critical to the Light and Darkness saga in the game. We want to make sure that in the next year of Destiny, the most critical content, both from player enjoyment of logging in every day and from knowing what's happening in the narrative and seeing the best content, remains in the game. That's the lens we're looking through. We have not been able to defeat gravity in terms of making Destiny twice as big as it is, but we want to make sure we're keeping the stuff that's important. That has been that right there. We have not been able to defeat gravity in terms of making Destiny twice as big as it is. This is something that I wish Bungie would talk about. This is a problem internally at Bungie. Whether it's limitations set by platforms or whether it's limitations by their own engine, there is an issue with Destiny being too big. There is a ceiling, and they are trying desperately to stay under that ceiling. Now, despite the fact I'm a PvE main, it would be remiss not to ask Blackburn what's gone on with PvP, a mode which appears to have been stabbed much like the Marie Celeste was screwed for many years. In his Twitter video, Blackburn outlined how a PvP strike team of developers was being brought in to perform a triage on the mode. But that begged the question, when and why was the decision made not to have a dedicated PvP team? Oh man, like forever ago, like 2018, 2019? Because there was a time in Destiny 2's life when it had a fairly high profile developers just working on PvP. However, I specifically recall a reference in a This Week at Bungie blog post from last November that the Trials of Osiris revamp had been handled by the team responsible for the weekly ritual modes, Vanguard, Crucible, and Gambit, clearly confirming PvP no longer had its own specialist team. This is why. Double primary system. I think the PvP team pitched the double primary system back before D2 Vanilla launched. It launched. It was terrible. That team got liquidated. Those developers ended up either leaving or moving to another team, and we have not had a PvP team since. Blackburn explains that when he came back to Bungie in early June of 2020, he found substantial uncertainty over the future of PvP. He describes the mood at Bungie as, I'm not so sure about this thing in the long run. We haven't seen it move the needle. Have we ever been able to satisfy the PvP audience? How do we deliver players what they want? Part of the problem has always been that there just aren't many examples of games that provide a hybrid of PvE and PvP. However, for Blackburn, being able to find an awesome gun and then take it into the Crucible remains part of the magic of Destiny. Yes, it does. One of the first things he said as a game director was, hey, we have to support this thing. We have to figure out how it makes sense. He swiftly adds that the strategy, which mostly amounted to better balancing and the occasional new mode, has not been enough. Now, with the new PvP strike team gearing up, Blackburn says the plan is to no longer sit on the fence when it comes to PvP. I don't blame PvP mains who must feel like the FPS equivalent of Stockholm Syndrome sufferers for still being skeptical. After all, Destiny 2 once went 950 days without a new map. In his Twitter video, Blackburn announced that a free map pack will be released in 2024, at which point I'm pretty sure I heard a coral swell in the background. What's really interesting is the promise that Bungie is finally going to prioritize the needs of people who actually play PvP rather than trying to drag the entire player base into Crucible. We don't want to say, hey, we're going to try to make every single person happy. There are really divisive camps. So the way we want to really change our strategy is to be clear about saying, this is the PvP audience for Destiny. This is what they want. We're going to center PvP around our players that enjoy playing Crucible for 20 hours a week, and we're going to make it more optional for players that don't. I put it to Blackburn that PvP has been in a vicious cycle because of the lack of content meant that the only thing to do was complain about balance or lack thereof, which led to the mode feeling toxic. His answer is canon. Throughout Destiny 2, for maybe its first 6 years, including Destiny 1, there was a sense of, hey, we're putting a bunch of effort into PvP, but it's not what the community wants, or we're not making them happy. Even when putting out maps, people would say, I don't like these maps and I wish they were different. Yeah, I think a lot of people are even complaining about the most recent map. Blackburn makes a contrast here with when Bungie added the Menagerie, which was a seasonal PvE mode that was universally loved, suggesting that when developers get that sort of reaction, the natural tendency is to try to make more of that thing that people have responded positively to. Straight up, I just think that we have to be more balanced than that, says Blackburn. There's a different strategy that can work here. And it's us going in saying, okay, we're going to be more clear. We're going to have a more targeted audience. And that's not going to be for everyone. But I think if we are clear with who we are trying to make PvP for, we can make the right decisions for that group and we can build a thing that people enjoy. It's definitely a new take. And if this one doesn't work, we'll try something else. We're not afraid of being wrong here. We're not going to let fear of being wrong stop us from doing something and trying to really nurture this part of the game. I think that's fantastic. All right, some of the questions that was asked. What slot does the new Golden Gun themed sniper rifle go in? The energy slot. We're getting a dungeon key next year, but will we get a reprise raid? Answer, we're getting 2 dungeons next year. We have not talked about reprise raids. What did we say last week, guys? I told you guys that I felt like we were probably not going to get a reprise raid. All my folks wondering to get Wrath of the Machine back inside of Destiny, doesn't look like it's going to happen. And we're going to continue with this Q&A section, but I want to point out something. I don't want to believe that next year is going to be kind of a dead year for Destiny. All right. I want to believe that the episodes are going to be great. They're going to be exciting. We're going to be geared up and there's going to be a new bad on the street for us to tackle. But something is telling me that episodes are going to be a way in which Bungie can actually dial things back a bit more. And confirming that we're getting 2 dungeons and no talk about a reprise raid, which makes me think that we're not getting a reprise raid, means, in my opinion, that Bungie is in fact going to be dialing back things a tad bit next year after the final shape and prepping everything to launch Marathon. Now, none of this matters if the final shape is terrible, by the way. Let me just say that. No one's even going to care what follows the year after. You know, you can't have 2 bad expansions back to back. Lifehouse had a lot of good things this year. I really like the season. I love the quality of life changes, but I'm just saying, like, if it comes out and they drop the ball narratively, it's the equivalent, in my opinion. Imagine if Halo 3 was the worst Halo. But what do you remember? Halo 3 was the best Halo. Halo Reach was also amazing. I'm just going to say that. It was actually my personal favorite. But you have to finish out strong. All right, moving on to the next question. If Witch Queen was a psychic detective story and Lightfall was an 80s action homage, what is the touchstone for the final shape? Some mixture between Lord of the Rings and Apocalypse Now. That's pretty cool. Is it conceivable or desirable that you would do another saga this long? We want to plan out what we do after the Light and Darkness saga better than we did the last 10 years. There it is. What they're saying here, guys, is that there's no active plan. That's what's being said. That's what's actually being said here. And the way development cycles work, right? Like, to pitch that next saga, it honestly would have had to begin development way before now, right? If it's not actually going to begin the planning process until after the Light and Darkness saga, then that development cycle is years out. Let us continue. Now, what's stopping you from dropping the 2 from the name at this point? Expectations and what a rebranding means. At the end of the day, guys, the reason why they're not dropping the 2 is because when Bungie inevitably makes Destiny 3, that will sell. Even if it's terrible, it will still sell. the 2 will remain until the jump occurs. I have no idea when that jump occurs. I have no idea when D3 would ever be made. But if you look at, you know, the initial sales for D2 vanilla, it was crazy. That jump from D1 to D2, it was wild. Will we ever get an all black shader? Certainly. But I think the scary part is once you give someone super black, is there any other shader they want in the video game? It's true. What can I personally say or do to get an ornament made for Verity's brow? Get more people to use Verity's brow. All right. What's something you wish players knew or understood better about how Destiny is made? It's made by a bunch of people that really love Destiny. That's the easy one. But otherwise, teaching people how tools work. Okay. Is that all the Q&A questions? I think so. All right. Well, there you go, guys. No new subclass, which we already knew. Strand was never supposed to launch with Witch Queen. And 7 missions, with the 8th mission being unlocked after completing the raid. That's wild.
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.